Emerging Threats Hub. The new arsenal, sanctions, swarm drones, and the future of conflict.
Welcome to Emerging Threats Hub. I'm your host, Sébastien. This week, the United States is moving a carrier strike group into the Caribbean, not for a training exercise, but as a direct response to escalating tensions with Venezuela. It's a significant show of force that has many asking, are we on the brink of another conflict in the Western Hemisphere? But the story of today's global security isn't just about carriers and troop deployments. It's about a far broader, more fundamental shift. It's about a new arsenal of statecraft, where the most powerful weapons aren't always made of steel and gunpowder. They are wielded in courtrooms, in cyberspace, and on factory floors. From legal battles that empower economic sanctions, to the high-stakes political infighting that can scuttle a continent's most important defense project, to the invisible battlefield of information that now decides who wins and who loses, the rules are being rewritten. In today's episode, we will decode the military posturing in Venezuela and assess the real risks. We'll analyze a landmark legal victory that's turning sanctions into a primary tool of foreign policy. We'll explore Europe's paradoxical race to rearm, seeing record industrial growth, alongside crippling political failure, and we'll examine the new doctrines of modern warfare, where the most critical fight is for control not of ground, but of the adversary's mind. This is Emerging Threats Hub. Let's get into it.
The geopolitical hotspot, decoding Venezuela.
Let's begin in the Caribbean. The deployment of the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group is a powerful signal. The stated reason is to conduct counter-narcotics operations, but the timing is unmistakable. It comes after disputed elections in Venezuela, where Nicolas Maduro claimed victory amid widespread allegations of fraud, and after a Venezuelan warplane recently fired on a civilian aircraft. The rhetoric is heating up. The U.S. is reinforcing its posture. But before we talk about invasion, we need to ask a more grounded question. What is Venezuela's actual military capability? The reality is, despite Russia's and China's support, Venezuela's military is largely a force in name only. It suffers from chronic underinvestment, poor maintenance, and low morale. Their air force consists of aging, Soviet-era fighters like the F-16s and Sukhoi jets, many of which are reportedly not airworthy. Their navy is primarily a coastal defense force, ill-equipped to challenge a U.S. carrier strike group. So if this isn't about a credible invasion threat, what is it about? For the United States, this is about reasserting the Monroe Doctrine in the 21st century, signaling to both Moscow and Beijing that the Western Hemisphere remains a sphere of U.S. strategic interest. It's a message sent in the language of military power. For Russia, its support for Maduro is a low-cost way to annoy the United States and maintain a toehold in the region, a strategic echo of Cold War dynamics. And for the Venezuelan leadership, external threats are a classic tool to distract from domestic crises, to rally nationalist sentiment, and to consolidate power. The real danger here isn't a large-scale conventional war. It's miscalculation. A single skirmish, a misinterpreted maneuver, could ignite a conflict nobody truly wants. And the human cost of that brinkmanship would be borne, as it always is, by the Venezuelan people, who have already endured years of political instability and economic collapse. This is a classic case of military posturing serving political goals, where the military hardware is often more of a prop than a practical threat. Understanding that distinction is key to de-escalating the situation.
The weapon of choice, sanctions on trial.
That military posturing in the Caribbean is one tool, but increasingly, nations are reaching for a different, non-kinetic weapon, economic sanctions. And a recent court ruling in the United Kingdom shows just how potent this weapon is becoming. For years, the UK government has used sanctions to target foreign individuals and entities, from Russian oligarchs to Iranian generals. But this power was challenged in court. The case centered on whether the government had the legal authority to impose sanctions without a new act of parliament for each specific case. This month, the UK Supreme Court sided with the government, It affirmed that the executive has broad, pre-existing authority to use sanctions as a foreign policy tool. Experts at the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, have called this a landmark victory for the UK's sanctions regime. What does this mean? It means sanctions are no longer an occasional, ad hoc tool. They are becoming a permanent, institutionalized part of how democracies project power short of war. This legal emboldening in the UK could set a precedent for other nations, solidifying what some are calling the age of sanctions. Now, sanctions are a tool of pressure, not a magic bullet. They can be effective at constraining regimes and signaling resolve, but they also carry significant costs. They can harm civilian populations, fragment global markets, and push targeted nations closer together, as we see with Russia, Iran, and China. But the core takeaway is this: our definition of conflict is expanding. A legal ruling in a London courtroom is now as geopolitically significant as a carrier deployment in the Caribbean. Both are instruments of statecraft, designed to shape the behavior of adversaries. The challenge for democratic societies is to wield this new power responsibly, ensuring it's used with clear objectives and a clear exit strategy to avoid becoming a form of permanent, low-grade economic warfare with no end in sight.
Europe's rearmament, an industrial and political paradox.
That shift in tools of statecraft is happening alongside a more traditional story: Europe's massive rearmament in the wake of the war in Ukraine. But here, we find a fascinating paradox. On one hand, you have a roaring success. The German defense giant Rheinmetall recently announced a record order backlog of nearly 30 billion euros. Its new artillery powder plant is ramping up production, and it's building tank factories in Germany and Ukraine. This isn't just a company doing well. It's a quantitative indicator of a continent transitioning to a war economy. It's the industrial muscle behind the political rhetoric. But on the other hand, you have a spectacular political failure. The Future Combat Air System, or FCAS, Europe's answer to the American F-35 program, is on the verge of collapse. This is a project intended to produce a next-generation fighter jet, a drone wingman, and a sophisticated combat cloud. It is, in theory, the cornerstone of European strategic autonomy. The problem? National interests. The French manufacturer, Dassault, is at an impasse with its German and Spanish partners over work share and intellectual property. France cannot, or will not, force its national champion to compromise. The political will to integrate has hit the hard wall of industrial sovereignty. So we have Europe's paradox. It's better than ever at producing the hardware of the past and present tanks, artillery, ammunition, but it's failing to build the collaborative systems of the future. This tells us something profound. Europe can pour money into defense, but can it build the political trust needed to be a true strategic superpower? Or is it destined to remain a powerful collection of national armies, better at coordinating than at truly integrating? The Rheinmetall boom and the FCAS bust are two sides of the same coin, revealing the central struggle of a continent that wants to be autonomous but is defined by its internal divisions.
The new kid on the block and the future fight.
So while Europe grapples with its big-picture strategy, soldiers on the ground are finally getting new tools. After years of technical failures and delays, the British Army's new Ajax armored fighting vehicle. Why is that significant? The Ajax is the British Army's first new armored fighting vehicle in nearly 30 years. That's a generation. Its deployment marks a crucial, if long overdue, modernization of the UK's armored forces. It's a tangible piece of hardware that reflects the broader trend of increased defense spending. But having a new vehicle is one thing. Knowing how to fight with it is another. And that brings us to the most critical and least visible shift in modern warfare. A powerful recent analysis in the Small Wars Journal argues that Western commanders are failing their soldiers. They continue to plan and execute operations that separate physical maneuvers, like moving tanks and troops, from non-kinetic effects. That means things like cyber attacks, electronic warfare, and information operations. The author argues that these aren't separate battles. They are one single integrated fight. In modern conflict, you don't just destroy an enemy tank. You seek to paralyze the entire enemy system, their command centers, their communications, their decision-making cycle. Victory is often achieved before a single shot is fired, by making it impossible for the enemy to react effectively. This is why Germany is rushing to deploy a new counter-drone system called Argos. Drones are cheap, abundant, and can be devastating. They are the perfect example of a low-cost, high-impact threat that can't be countered with just a bigger tank. You need a new way of thinking. The through line is this. The future of conflict is about synchronization. It's about integrating your legal tools, your economic tools, your information tools, and your physical weapons into one coherent, seamless strategy. The side that masters this synchronization, not the side with the most guns, will have the decisive advantage.
A wider world, the Dragon's Reach.
This isn't just a European or American story. Let's shift our gaze to South Asia. Bangladesh, a nation of over 160 million people, has just finalized a deal to purchase China's SY-400 missile system. This is a short-range ballistic missile system that gives Bangladesh a significantly enhanced strike capability against its neighbors. More importantly, it deepens Bangladesh's defense ties with Beijing. This is a clear example of how China expands its global influence. It doesn't just build ports and roads through the Belt and Road Initiative. It also sells sophisticated, affordable weapons, binding nations into its strategic orbit. This transaction alters the regional power balance and presents a new challenge for India, which views China's growing presence in its neighborhood with great concern. It's easy to view this through a purely adversarial lens of a new Cold War, but it's more complex. An interesting piece in Foreign Affairs recently reminded us of a time when the U.S. and China were allies. During the Second World War, American pilots, the famous Flying Tigers, fought alongside China against Japan. It was a partnership of necessity, forged in a common struggle. History shows that these great power relationships are not fixed. They are fluid, shaped by context and interest. Today, China and the U.S. are strategic competitors. The missile deal with Bangladesh is a data point in that competition. But understanding that fluidity, that history, is crucial. It reminds us that the current alignment is a choice, not a permanent state of nature, and that future diplomatic breakthroughs are possible, even if they seem distant today. The challenge is to manage the present competition without closing the door on future cooperation.
The unseen currents.
So from carrier deployments to court rulings, from industrial booms to new missile deals, we've covered a lot of ground. What's the thread that connects all these seemingly disparate events? It's the unseen currents. It's the failure of systems that creates the conditions for the threats we see today. Take the stalled FCAS project. It's a symptom of a European political system that struggles to translate its collective will into unified action. Consider the situation in Venezuela. It's exacerbated by global energy politics and the legacy of American interventionism, two deeply systemic issues. Even the climate crisis plays a role. A recent analysis pointed out that every failure to reach a global climate agreement produces cascading security risks. Resource scarcity, climate-induced migration, and extreme weather events are all threat multipliers that will create more Venezuelas, more conflicts over scarce resources, and more pressure on fragile states. They are the undercurrent that erodes the bedrock of global stability. The solutions, therefore, cannot be simple. They require integrated thinking. We can't just build more tanks. We have to build the political institutions to use them collectively. We can't just impose sanctions. We must do so within a clear legal and ethical framework that serves a strategic goal. We can't just counter drones. We have to fundamentally reshape our military doctrine to fight on the information battlefield. The key takeaway from this week's events is that we are moving from an era of simple problems to an era of complex, interconnected ones. Navigating this landscape successfully will require more than just power. It will require wisdom, foresight, and a commitment to architecting a system of global governance that is as integrated and sophisticated as the threats we face. The path to stability and peace is not found in any single weapon, but in the coherent, principled, and intelligent integration of all our tools. Thank you for joining me on Emerging Threats Hub. I'm Sébastien. Be vigilant, be curious, and be humane.